What's up, junkies? It is just after Christmas, and we are about to go into the new year, and that means a new season of racing for 2026. And I'm personally excited about it. And in that spirit, I wanted to give you guys a Christmas gift. And that Christmas gift is going to be one of knowledge. Specifically, knowledge around my setup for every single track that I've gone and raced in the past 2 seasons. So, as I go through some of these setups, I want to provide a little bit of a word of caution, which is that these numbers are very subjective, right? So my bike is going to be a CBR. There's aftermarket suspension on it, so the specific numbers are going to be different. You may not even have the same type of adjustments. My spring rates may be different. I may weigh different than you do. All of these things are going to impact and change exactly what the numbers are. So I don't want you guys to pay attention too much to any individual number, but maybe around just kind of the difference between the different tracks and how I think about what characteristics I'm trying to get out of the suspension or what I'm trying to get it to do or help prevent happen. I'd also be interested in know, like, what do you guys run here? I'm just a random dude who likes riding motorcycles. Like, I'm no authoritative knowledge on this. I'm mostly figuring things out and taking knowledge that other people have given me and starting with that. So I want to give you guys kind of like some of that, starting point. What I will say might be helpful specifically to CBR owners is the gearing. Being able to start with a consistent sprocket set and gearing is very helpful going into a weekend, especially at a new place. The other thing I will mention is that my pace has changed dramatically. So, like, one of the things they say is if you want to get quicker, just start racing. You'll get exponentially quicker than if you're just doing track days. That's very true. My setup at the very first track that I race at is going to be for a comparative pace, which is much slower than that of the most recent one. Finally, I'll give you guys one hot take before I jump into the setups. And this hot take may get me in a little bit of hot water, but it's that I like to err on the side of a softer setup. And this may seem a little bit counterintuitive because when people talk about like getting into performance driving or racing motorcycles or anything, like, you think of like really stiff suspension, and people will go out to their first track day and they're like, all right, I'm going to go drive really fast. And like, now I got to like, crank all my suspension settings up because, I'm going to be going fast. I don't really think of it like that. The better way that I think of is that you want to have the suspension as soft as possible and still be able to do what you need to do. And the reason is because the geometry of the motorcycle is so dynamic. And so you want your inputs to be able to impact that dynamic change because, as you brake real hard and you compress those front forks, and now your wheelbase is getting much smaller and you're able to take a tighter line, and your radius of your corner is going to be a little bit smaller because of that. As you get on the gas and it kind of stretches out that wheelbase, now you're going to have a little bit of a wider line, and you need those things to happen at different parts of the track while doing different things. If you like over dampen your motorcycle, like, it's going to feel like it's running around in mud, right? Let's jump into some actual setups. So we're going to start. My first weekend racing was actually at Homestead Miami. Homestead Miami, as if you guys haven't been there before, it's actually like a NASCAR track, and there's an infield section of it, kind of like Daytona, but it's a little bit different. If you want some good videos on it, like Blanco Cycles or Javier goes there all the time. He's got some great videos there. I don't go there very much. I haven't been there since the very first time I was ever racing a motorcycle. But if we look at the track, you will see like there's some big long straights here. And especially like going into turn 6 and going into turn 8 here, you have actually like a straight and then pretty tight turns. These are going to be very hard braking zones. That's going to be something you need to prioritize or think about as you're setting up the motorcycle for this track. And as such, it's going to maybe require a little bit more support in the front end. And this was actually, if you guys race around the Southeast, you probably know Seth Starnes, who works with suspension. He's rebuilt some of my stuff for me. I met him that first weekend, and honestly, like since this was my first weekend racing, I was having a hard time like even compressing the front all the way down. We ended up pulling all the preload out of here, so we'll jump down here to the actual suspension settings, and you'll see like preload, we have like 0 turns of preload in here. Like I was just trying to get that thing to actually move, and honestly, for the pace that I was running, my springs were probably too stiff, and they weren't particularly stiff springs. It was just, that's how I was riding. Compression is pretty far out, which again is trying to lend itself to allowing the motorcycle to move. If you have compression that's too stiff or too closed off, as you go to transfer that weight, it's going to really like hinder it from doing so. Rebounds, probably a little bit on the open side. And then the rear, again, preload there was all the way out as well. Compression and rebound are a little bit more in the middle. And maybe that's one thing I'll show you guys quickly, just to like visually get your mindset for where these numbers are, is if we look at like the front forks, preload goes all the way up to about 15 there. So, middle of the road is about 8. Homestead Miami, we were down at 0, so that's very open. Rebound is going to be the clicks, and that's going to be between like 0 and 20. So 10's about in the middle there. And then compression is actually, for me, is a little knob at the bottom of the forks. And that's going to go all the way to like 2.5 is all the way out, and 0 is all the way in. So as you get a higher number, just like on the other dampening ones as well, then that's going to be a softer setup. Rear is going to be similar. Now with the TTX, I think I've got 20 on both the compression and rebound settings. They're actually going to be very similar in terms of like how you adjust those. There are 2 knobs there, and then preload, you've got the little kind of twisty thing on the side there, and that goes up to 20 as well, I think. So just to like set your frame of reference there in terms of like what we have available, and kind of like percentage wise what these numbers actually mean. In terms of gearing, I did go with a front sprocket of 15 and a rear sprocket of 43. One thing I actually do is I have a 15 on the front sprocket, and I never actually change that. I change the rear sprocket between, usually most common is going to be 43 and 41. Ignore these numbers. It's not that there's 0, it's that I don't bother measuring them, I'm not changing my fork height and shock height in between rounds. And my front and rear sag, I change my springs around, but I know which springs I want for different tracks. I don't really have a reason to measure the sag, because sag is making sure you have kind of the correct springs, and the bike is like roughly where you need it to be, and then you can fine tune from there. Since I already know that, I don't bother measuring it, and so I don't record it. I'll give a PB for all of these tracks as well. So at Homestead Miami, I think my PB there was like a 137. That's about the pace I was at when I was running this thing. The next one that I went to was NOLA down in New Orleans. And this is probably like maybe one of the most unique tracks that I've been to in terms of ones that other people I know have been to. Not a ton of people get all the way out to NOLA. It was kind of an interesting track. I thought it was a pretty nice facility. Not one that gets commonly raced at least with some of the other organizations. So gearing for this one was a 1543 as well. I honestly did not change a whole lot between NOLA and Homestead Miami because I just didn't know. So if we look at a track map of NOLA, it does look very different, but we still have a long straight coming into not quite as sharp a turn, but it's a pretty heavy braking zone there. This turn, you also can pick up a little bit of speed here because you've got kind of this wide turn that you're pretty much on the gas the whole way through and then on here. So you can get a decent amount of speed there, and then into this kind of heavy left-hand turn as well. The rest of this, you get a little bit of speed there, but it kind of goes into this like flowy back and forth section. And so it's not, you don't have crazy braking. There's a little bit of braking there, but you do have a decent amount here. So you want the bike to flip back and forth a little bit, but you also want that support in the front. So you're probably not going to be wildly different than at least I was, especially, again, given the pace that I was running, than I was at Homestead. So for NOLA, again, 1543. Front suspension, we had preload. We did add a little bit of preload here, pretty much in the middle there. Compression was still fairly open though, because I wanted it to compress. I didn't want that to be hampered too much. And then rebound's pretty open as well. Again, I kind of default to a little bit more of an open setup here. Rear, I did add a little bit of preload to the rear, but not a ton, because again, I wasn't really sure what I was doing here. So I wanted to make sure I wasn't making any drastic changes. Compression and rebound, slightly stiffer, I think, but in general, very close to kind of middle valving there. And for times here, I think my PB here was like a mid 155 or so. The next one is Little Tally. This is one that is common on a WERA race calendar. It's common on other ones as well. It's a small track, but it's kind of a fun little thing. This one's interesting. So this, like, sometimes you think of, oh, if you have a big long straight, you want taller gearing or something like that. And that may be true, but sometimes actually the smaller tracks you also want a taller gearing on. So again, I keep front sprocket 15, rear sprocket I actually go down to a 41, and I just don't even use 6th gear. And it just made like where I was shifting and everything a little bit easier for me. Let's look at a tally map. So this is a pretty small track. The one thing is it's less hard braking than the last two tracks. So like this is probably, these two sides are probably like in a little bit here, but you've got these S's here, like your longest straights. And even going into this turn here, turn 2 is so banked that you actually can carry a decent amount of speed into it. This one is banked as well, and it's a little bit wider radius, so you can carry a lot of speed here. You do brake a decent amount going into this one, but you can kind of just huck it over and keep rolling through there. So in general, I would say this probably needs a little bit less front end support than the last two tracks. Now, at the same time, I'm picking up pace a little bit. So sometimes these things, you know, when you look at the raw numbers, they tell a couple of different stories there. And so we'll see that here as well. So while the track probably needs less front end support than at Homestead Miami, I actually have more preload in the front than I did there. And again, that's just because I was getting faster and starting to ask a little bit more of the motorcycle and the suspension and getting it to work a little bit more. Compression, it's still fairly open, but I did dial it in a little bit here. Rebound, pretty in the middle, a little bit on the open side. Rear suspension, preload, a little bit more. Rebound was actually pretty open. And then the compression there was pretty much middle, just on the other side of middle. My PB there at Little Tally was like a mid 102. The next one we will do is CMP, which sadly is not usually on a WERA grid these days, is on an ASR grid, and there's plenty of track days that also go to CMP. CMP does have some interesting features here, and particularly has some pretty decent braking zones. So like into 1 here, you can pick up some decent speed on the front straight there. Going into 1, you brake pretty hard. It's a little bit kind of building some speed through here. You kind of trail the brakes a bit through this section. Got a long straight here, but this is a banked kind of sweeping turn. So you are on the brakes, but probably not as hard as some of the other places like here and here. And go into here, the 11 is a pretty hard braking zone area as well. And then into 14, you've built up a decent amount of speed as well. And so you've got some hard braking there. That's one that people commonly overshoot, commonly wash out a front end, or even commonly high side there. You've got some pretty heavy braking there. Just visually looking at this, I would expect us to need a little bit more kind of front end support there. Gearing here, I did 1543 as well. Just seems to give me decent drive, and also shift points are reasonable. So I've only really done the endurance race there, and I think my PB was like a 140. And so that's going to be front suspension. Start with a preload. We've got 8 turns of preload, so we're starting to get a little bit more like a front end support, and also kind of middle of the range of where my adjustment can take me there. Compression is starting to get a little bit stiffer. Again, heavy braking, we probably want a little bit more support. We can get that transfer of weight by manipulating the brakes, and we want the compression to start kind of kicking in there and help prevent it from collapsing too quickly there. Rebound as well actually stays fairly open. Rear suspension, preload, we actually have a bit more, and this sometimes has to do with trying to get the bike to turn a little bit more, especially when you saw some of the like kind of tighter corners here, and even some of like trying to get the bike to rotate around these parts and some of these things. Having a little bit more preload can help me just kind of get the bike to turn around as you're driving out of corners. It just kind of raises up the rear a little bit to begin with. It can also help with some of the anti-squat capabilities of the motorcycle, and so that will also help turn the bike a little bit more. Rebound and compressions, dead center. The next one we go to is actually Road Atlanta. This one is a setup that is more notes from someone else. This is one that I worked with Thermosman a little bit, particularly on the front for. Here at Road Atlanta, I do have to run 1541. It's a bummer I don't get as much drive, but I need the taller gearing for the back section, and you're topping out 6 there. And one of the reasons I actually went to Thermosman was because my pace was picking up. It's got heavy braking. It's also got a lot of elevation change, and so I really needed stiffer springs going into it. And so I went to Thermosman, bought some new springs off of him, and also had him kind of generally get the bike set up where he thought it would be. So the spring rate did go, if you notice from some of the other ones, like Little Tally, this was down at 9.0. We went to 9.75. Rebound, 12 clicks, roughly middle, a little bit more open. Preload, 10. We're really starting to throw some preload in there now. Again, stiff springs, more preload, trying to get that front end to have a little bit of support there. Compression, 1 turn. We're starting to dial it back a little bit there, and turn in the valving so that we get a little bit less initial weight transfer there. Rear suspension is going to be a little bit more in the middle here. We do have a decent amount of preload there. Again, trying to get the bike to turn a little bit as we're driving out of corners, and the compression and rebound are pretty much in the middle there. This is a little bit on the stiffer side. It's a little bit more on the open side, but we're not too far from center there. My PB around Road Atlanta is more in the 139s. Barber Motorsports, in general, you've got a ton of elevation change here. And you also have some pretty heavy braking, going into turn 5, Charlotte's Web here. We've got a lot of braking. Turn 1 has a decent amount of braking. Turn 4, you can carry some speed through there, but there is some braking. But the elevation change as well just definitely sets it up so you want to have some front end support there. Maybe not quite as much as Road Atlanta, I don't think, but you still want some. For gearing, I do go with a 1543 again. I kept the springs in there, 975. Preload was 8, so I dialed back a little bit. Again, not quite as much support that is needed as Road Atlanta, but you still need some. Compression, this was turned in a little bit more as well. And then rebound was 14 as well. Rear suspension, preload 8. Again, trying to get the bike to turn coming out of some of those tighter turns. Rebound and compression are, again, pretty close to center, with a little bit of open revalving and a little bit of kind of closed off compression there. Finally, we have Roebling, and I actually have 2 different setups to show you guys with Roebling. So this setup, I do run 1541. That doesn't change in terms of gearing there. I enjoy that gearing there. It helps me a little bit with roll speed. Again, it's one where you aren't topping out the top of 6th gear on the longest straight. Suspension settings for this one, I had left in 975 springs. And not only was this for a test and tune, I also did a full race weekend here on it and really struggled with this one. I had attempted to take all the preload out of here to try to still be able to utilize these springs there. And at my pace, it just doesn't work. It would understeer coming out of corners. And the problem was you just have too much support in the front end. And so the bike's going to get taller sooner, and it's just going to run wide. This is what I mean. Roebling, if we look at Roebling, we've got a track map here. Great. I should have started with this, but we don't actually have, very hard braking zones. The hardest is going to be turn 1. And honestly, people overestimate how much they need to brake into turn 1. You can carry a lot of speed through turn 1. And ideally, if you're to take turn 2 correctly, you need to carry a lot of speed into turn 1. And then the rest of this section is like, this you're just kind of setting the front end there. At least on a 600, I know 1000s are a little bit different, but turn 4, you can drag the brakes a little bit. Turn 5, you can also like go in there and not brake. Turn 6, I kind of set the front end with the brakes, but you can get through that whole section without it. Turn 8, you don't brake in. And then you're back to turn 1 again. So there isn't a ton of braking that goes on there. There's also not a lot of elevation change. So what ends up happening is you're just leaned over a lot of time. If you think about going over a bump on a motorcycle, if you're straight up and down, and the bump is 1 inch tall or something, your suspension just has to travel 1 inch, right? If you're leaned over though, now you've got to travel more than 1 inch because your suspension has to travel the hypotenuse of the triangle made up of that 1 inch bump and your lean angle, right? So it needs to be able to move the same amount, and you haven't really changed the force on that it's getting applied to the suspension from the bump. So you've got to make up for that somehow. And to make up for that, you're going to open up your valving and allow it to move a little bit more. And again, spring rates can help with this too, because you aren't going to compress the front end under braking like you would at somewhere like Road Atlanta. And so the forces that you're going to feel are cornering forces. And to get the front end and the bike to behave how you want to in the mid corner, you can't rely on the brakes anymore. You got to rely on kind of like your roll speed and momentum going through there. And that's inevitably going to be, at least for me, a little bit of a softer spring setup. Rear, I do actually jack up the rear a little bit, again, to try to get it, especially in these long sweeping turns, that when you get on the gas, to try to get the bike to rotate a little bit more. Again, this one, I was just struggling the whole time to get it to do it. And then I went back and put in 925 spring rate, 1541 again, 925 preload. Now you can add a little bit of preload in there so the bike isn't just at the very top of its stroke. And then we've got rebound and compression are fairly open. These are going to be all the way back to pretty open there for compression comparatively to any of the other tracks, other than the first one I was doing at Miami. Rebound's going to be on the kind of open side, closer to like 3/4 the way open. Preload on the rear, we've got some preload in there, probably a little bit less than the one with the 975 springs because the bike isn't so front lopsided now. And so we can kind of keep things a little bit more level there. And then compression and rebound, we're going to leave fairly open as well. That helped a lot. If we look at some of the sessions from Roebling, we can actually see that there is a little bit better. So let's go Roebling and do front spring rate. We did have a quick session on the 975 spring rates down to a 16.9, but most of these are a little bit higher up here in 17s and an 18. And again, a lot of this was because the bike didn't want to turn coming out of corners. So how you make up for that is you get on the gas a little bit later. And so you just lose time and you're fighting the bike the whole time to do it. And it just leads to lack of confidence. And then it all kind of snowballs into just a slower lap time. You can kind of see immediately we we just start going faster with the 925s. We just have the correct setup there. All right. So I think that is all of the tracks that I have to go over with you guys. And so, this is kind of going to be the end of the video. Let me know if you disagree with any of these setups. I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on, what do you think about when you go into a day? Do you mess with your suspension settings at all? Do you get super in the weeds with it? What kind of theories or differences have you noticed between the different tracks and when you've started to play with your suspension? Let me know. I'm always down to be wrong about some of these things and kind of figure out what I can learn from you guys as well, as much as I can try to help other people coming up beneath me as well. So with that being said, it's almost 2026, and good luck with the 2026 season, whether you're just doing track days or racing. Get out there in whatever capacity you can and enjoy being out on track.